Two big breaking headlines from President Trump. First, he says he plans to negotiate with Iran's new leadership following the death of its supreme leader. And two, Iran was 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. Joining me now is Democratic Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons. He serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome. Glad to have you here. Those two questions. First, the idea that he plans to speak with new Iranian leadership. Wasn't regime change his goal?
Well, look, what he seems to be pursuing in Iran is closer to what he pursued in Venezuela, which was simply replacing the top leader of the regime and then negotiating for an oil deal or a minerals deal with what's left of a repressive authoritarian regime. That's not what the people of Venezuela were hoping for when he met with Maria Machado, who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize, the leader of the opposition from Venezuela. She was hoping that he would be pressing for elections for a return to democracy. That's not what's been happening in Venezuela. And obviously, the people of Iran who came into the streets by the tens of thousands earlier this year and were encouraged to do so by Trump and were killed by the thousands by the brutal regime of the Ayatollah, they were hoping for regime change. I do think it's a positive if he's willing to begin negotiations. But frankly, I think we need to hear as a country from our president. He hasn't addressed us about this war in 36 hours, and posting a video to Truth Social, in my view, just doesn't cut it, especially now that we have American casualties in this new war in the Middle East.
But, Senator, what if a further hardliner is brought into power in the wake of these attacks? Then what? That's one of the real dangers that I've been citing since Trump launched this war of choice, is that we don't have a clear path or strategy for how to achieve a positive regime change in Iran. Look, last week in President Trump's State of the Union address to Congress and the country, he spent just 3 minutes out of 2 hours on Iran. And I was in the chamber. I couldn't tell what his goals really are. Are they to defend and support protesters? Is it to make it impossible for Iran to ever have a nuclear weapon? Was it to degrade their ballistic missile capability? Was it to fight against their support for terrorism in the region? Those are different means that require different ends with a different scope. And to the second issue you just raised, that President Trump claims they were 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon, I've never seen any intelligence to suggest that. Is it possible that they were 2 weeks from having enough fissile material to assemble the material for a weapon? Yes. But in the strike last year, led by President Trump and our military in partnership with the Israelis, he claimed that they obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment and weapons program. And what I've seen is evidence that their ability to actually assemble and deliver a nuclear weapon was still a long way away, and in no small part due to the success of last year's strike. And, Senator, I will say you are very much echoing the sentiments of Joe Cirincione, with whom I spoke in this last hour. He said the very same thing about the ability to have an actual implementable nuclear weapon months and months away from for the number of processes that would have to take place. Again, fissile material, perhaps for 2 weeks from now. That is not anything close to having a nuclear weapon like that. Let's get to, tragically, those 3 U.S. service members who were killed in action as part of the military operation. We had 5 also seriously wounded. In a statement yesterday, sir, you called this a reckless new war of choice. Do you believe this administration, prior to going in, properly weighed the risks and strategy of such a massive military operation? Is there any evidence of that? No, and part of how a democracy should go to war is that the president and his senior national security advisors should have to make the case to the American people and to Congress. That's why the Constitution gives Congress, in the Article 1 provision of the Constitution, the power to decide whether or not to go to war. Look, for months and months before the war was launched against Iraq under the administration of George W. Bush, his Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor went and briefed Congress. Congress debated. Congress voted on an authorization for the use of military force. We should be doing the same here. President Trump hasn't made that case. And part of what he's doing now in claiming mistakenly that Iran was that close to a nuclear weapon is trying to find the justification for why there was an imminent threat that required him to act without any explanation to the American people or a vote by Congress. At the end of the day, what matters here is that President Trump ran for president on lowering people's costs, making America healthy again, and no new wars of regime change. This is a war directed at regime change. My hope is that it will not expand and become more dangerous and more deadly and cost the lives of more American service members, diplomats, civilians, and people throughout the region. But in the absence of any clear strategy and with the absence of congressional support, President Trump is the one who's responsible for launching this war. And if it goes badly, President Trump's the one that folks should hold to account, because he ran for president saying he wasn't going to start wars like this.
The president said we have very strong objectives. If the objectives are regime change, what you just heard at the end of that posting, that the Revolutionary Guard, the police, others should lay down their arms and get immunity, is that a step to support that regime change? Is that realistic? Have you seen or heard anything from this administration that you think moves the ball on it?
Well, not yet, Chris. He said earlier in those remarks that the members of the IRGC and the military are surrendering in droves or whatever. I have seen no evidence of that. That would be an indicator that the regime is fracturing, and you really need to have some of the military and security services start to separate themselves from the regime if you're going to have any hope that there's going to be some type of groundswell of opposition activity inside of Iran that has a hope of actually toppling the regime. But right now, we haven't seen that. Maybe it's happening behind the scenes. Maybe the intelligence agencies in the U.S. and in Israel are working with some of the military commanders. I don't know. I haven't seen that. But, you know, it's unsurprising that the U.S. military has performed in such exemplary fashion in terms of carrying out these operations. But again, I haven't seen any indication that this means that the IRGC and the regime are ready to surrender. Exact opposite. They are launching all of these missile attacks against the Gulf states and Israel. They are trying to respond however they can. And we're killing a lot of Iranians. And yes, a lot of Iranians inside of Iran, really were reviled by the Supreme Leader Khamenei, and we're glad that he's killed. But there are a lot of Iranians who very much revered him, and I think more and more Iranians who are going to be killed are going to be very angry at the United States. So this is, as I said before, this is an ugly situation right now. We don't know where it's going. I don't think anybody knows where it's going. There's going to be, I think, a lot more violence, a lot more deaths, more injuries, whether it be inside Iran and outside. So again, starting a war like this is relatively easy when you have a U.S. military like we have. But where this goes, I think, Donald Trump, this is going to be seen by many people as just being very arrogant and a lot of American hubris there, a lot of bravado. We'll see how the tone changes in the coming days and weeks, because this is not going to end anytime soon, unfortunately. This is going to, I think, be with us for quite some time to come.
Well, and that's exactly what's concerning a lot of folks who have taken to the streets of the United States who are protesting. I want to play for you what one woman in Florida told our reporter.
We've fought endless wars. I joined the Army and fought in a war that started when I was 2 years old, right, in Iraq. And that's not something we're going to do again. We're not going to waste a whole generation of Americans fighting on the other side of the world and in the end accomplishing nothing.
So that's just one man, but representative of a lot of people in different cities across America who came out. And the president said in addressing the 3 brave Americans who have died so far that there will likely be more. How might public pressure factor into this moving forward, or do you think it will?
Well, certainly there's a large segment of Trump's MAGA base that really was opposed and is opposed to foreign intervention and military operations such as this. And I think as it becomes more and more apparent that this was a war of choice, we didn't need to do this because there was no imminent threat to U.S. national security interests. and how now U.S. military personnel are in harm's way and some are being killed and injured, I think there's going to be a lot of questions about, first of all, the wisdom of going forward with this, but then how do you extract yourself from this situation? Because again, it's very clear the Iranian regime is not going to go quickly or silently into the night just because Donald Trump has unleashed U.S. military against them. Again, Iran is a very large country, over 90 million people, and the military forces are several million. You have the regular military, you have the IRGC, you have the Basij, the paramilitary forces that try to keep the people suppressed. And when Trump says, he's going to give immunity, that's I don't understand what he means by